So my name is Ginger Grant. I am a Microsoft Data Platform MVP and a Microsoft Certified Trainer, and I've got a couple of classes on LinkedIn. So if you feel like learning more about Fabric and your company does it for free, highly recommend you checking it out. And I put my contact information up here as well. Let's take a picture of it. Pause. So also, at PASS, they're really interested in finding everybody's feedback about sessions. So please evaluate this session at passdatacommunitysummit.com/evaluation or use the handy dandy QR code. All right, enough of that. Let's get started. So you may have seen this slide before or something very similar. And this gets into the architecture of Fabric. Since most of you understand or are currently using Fabric, we'll put it that way, who knows about understanding, you know that what Fabric does is it puts everything inside of one lake. You have one lake per tenant. And the one lake is a fancy ADLS Gen 2 that you can't control. But, and you pay for the storage on, but only $28 a terabyte a month, so it's not terrible. But it's optimized for database performance. And what that means is that Microsoft wants to have everything that Fabric is going to be using Parquet and then Delta on top of Parquet. So a little bit of history of like why that's different, why that matters, is that like many things, Parquet came first. And funny story about Parquet, the reason that Parquet exists is because somebody wanted to win some money. A bunch of graduate students over at Berkeley wanted to, they went and applied for this contest that Netflix was having to see whether or not that you could pick a better algorithm. And the winner of this contest, which was held in 2009, was $1 million, to quote Dr. Evil. So they worked really hard, and they came up with this really cool thing called Spark, because 2009, the AI of the day was Hadoop, big data. That was a cool thing. Everybody was using it. So what they did is they looked at how they could take data in the Hadoop cluster and optimize it for in-memory usage. That's why it's called Spark and Parquet, because there is a rule: if you want to be part of Hadoop, you must have a dumb name. So they complied. They didn't even come in the top 10. But we all got Spark and Parquet as a result. Now, the reason that Parquet is cool and why Microsoft wants it to be what's used for databases is that it's optimized for storing things into memory. So that means it's compressed, which means if you open up a Parquet file, you see garbage. You can't see anything inside of a Parquet file with, just by opening it up, unlike, say, a CSV file. But this compressed version can work very well in memory. And because it's compressed, it also stores well as well. So everyth's in this Parquet format. And on top of that, of course, who cares? We want to query it, right? Because who wants data if you can't query it? You can't query it, it's worthless. So what we want to do is figure out how to query it. So one thing that came along after Parquet was Databricks developed a system for making Parquet files more like databases, and that's Delta Parquet. So you have to have Parquet to put Delta on top of it, and that gives you a log file and some database-like functions. What does that mean? That means everything that we're talking about is the same underlying file structure. It's going to be Delta Parquet. So Parquet first, then you make it Delta. So the reason that I'm bothering to tell you all this is because the data is stored the same-ish in one lake. So all of your data is stored and can be accessed the same way. The other thing that Microsoft likes to do is reuse code. So don't we all, right? Which means that there are many things with Lakehouse and Warehouse that are exactly the same. And starting with the underlying file structure. The underlying file structure is the same for both. So that's not going to buy you anything that's particularly different between the two of them. So with these, both have schemas, although it's in preview. And let's just say I'm kind of mad at the Lakehouse schema preview. So I'm going to hold off using it for a while because it bit me when a customer site. So, but it'll work the same way someday. I bet you by Ignite it works a lot better than it did last week when I was at a client site. But it also has the same SQL engine, which means that if the question is, can I do that in Lakehouse, Warehouse? The answer is yes. When it comes to things like data types, data masking, row-level security, and SQL engine. They are the same. They are not exactly the same as SQL Server. Why? Because they're new and they haven't been able to put all the features in yet. Working on it. So it's kind of a thing that they're trying to get them all together. So the SQL is the same, and the structure is the same. So that part of it is no different. So let's get into the specifics about what makes a lakehouse different from a warehouse. So in a lakehouse, you have a one-to-one relationship between file folders and tables. Going back to Delta Parquet, with Delta Parquet, what the file structure is a log subdirectory and then a series of files that contain changes. So it's not a file. It's not ever going to be a file because Delta Parquet, at least at a minimum you have two, the two being the log, and which may have one entry saying this is new data, and then the underlying file. So everything is in a folder structure. But there's a one-to-one match. So if you have a table called date, you'll have a folder called date. If you have a table in your lakehouse called customer, you'll have a folder called customer. So every single one you'll have a matching entry for. Now you can choose to use data shortcuts to shortcut your data in Lakehouse so that you don't have to copy it from anywhere. One of the things that Microsoft realized with Fabric, well actually Power BI in general, because everybody's always copying the same data because nobody talks to anybody. That can happen with any application though. I'm working with a really large client and I told them, I said, you know, the technology makes it possible, but if you don't know that somebody else has brought in a database, you don't know that you can shortcut it until you talk to somebody. So that means that two people will take the data from the source and bring it in because they don't know any better. But ideally, you'd only have to do that kind of thing once. And it uses T-SQL query language in its environment. Another thing that I didn't add on the slide but is true with Lakehouse and Warehouse is you can use a SQL endpoint to access either one of them. And a SQL endpoint means SQL Server Management Studio. And oh, by the way, for those of you who weren't paying as good of attention as you should be, that was me. I'm like, cool, I'm going to download 21 for my demo. It'll be really cool. Do this in dark mode. Yeah, it's not out yet. So, you know, just so that you know, don't bother looking. It's not out yet, so I'm using the old one. Now let's talk about Warehouse. Question, yeah.
So it looks like it supports, like in the SQL engine, you can do the store procedure.
You can write store procedures. You can write views.
Yeah. So what is the pro and con using the Spark notebook versus using store procedure?
What is the pro and con using the Spark notebook besides the store procedures? It depends on what you're using it for.
Check from the data.
Check from the data?
Transform
transforming the data. If you're, Spark may be faster. It may not be. It's funny, I was talking to a friend of mine who works at Microsoft, Brad Schatt, and he's like, store procedures all the way, do all your data transformations, why would you do anything else? He also likes to give me a hard time too. But there are reasons that you would want to do it in Spark. For example, if I have to do a transformation where I have to do something more complicated than select star join, from something if my data's messed up. Like for example, I need to do like a regex on a field to pull some data out of it. That would probably perform better in Spark than it would a stored proc. If I'm doing a simple join, doesn't really matter. You could do either one from a data transformation perspective, and you wouldn't find a benefit necessarily from one or the other. So you could, now the only other thing too, is this gets into how you do pipelines. So I like, when I do pipelines, and what I tell people to do as a consultant to do pipelines, is to make sure that you plan for the day that your pipeline goes down. And that's because some other people, not you, it's not your pipeline's fault that it went down. Some other people gave you bad data, and it blew up. That's going to happen. So when you're writing your data transformation logic, you need to accommodate that. And if you do everything in memory, then you got to start from further back. And a lot of times, if you do it in a Spark notebook and do an interim write, that means you can start from a later spot in your pipeline than if you have to start from the beginning because everything you did was in memory because you did it all inside of a stored proc. So kind of weigh that. But is there anything wrong with doing all of your data transformations using stored procedures in a pipeline in Fabric? Absolutely not. I'm not going to tell you not to do that because that could be the best choice depending on what you're doing. And that's what's so tricky about this, because a lot of times it's not like, no, that's wrong. It's in this situation, it's not the best tool. Like, just to give you an example, Dataflow Gen 2, awesome, love it. For those of you who haven't played with Dataflow Gen 2, it's Power Query to transform data. Great, you can do clicky and draggy, and then you can just get all the applied steps on the side. If you screw up, you can just kill one and keep on and go back and keep on going. Love it. Don't try that with 1,000,000 rows. It'll blow up. And when do you find that out? After you've written the whole thing and spent, a couple hours maybe making it perfect, because it works great on that 1,000 rows you get as a sample, but not 1,000,000. It'll die. So again, great tool for everything? No. I also had a client ask me Dataflow Gen 2. They said, hey, how do I create a primary key using Dataflow Gen 2? And I said, you pick another tool, because it doesn't do that well. So this is the whole thing about tools. So Lakehouse, you're going to end up with your Parquet. You're going to end up with a bunch of Parquet files. They're going to be in a folder. Those are going to be your tables. Now, Warehouse is different. So Warehouse uses Delta Parquet as well. But if you look at the files, you don't have that one-to-one match thingy going on. You've got Delta Parquet for Warehouse. So it's not the same structure, really, which means you can do different things. The other thing I just wanted to clear up, it is not, big N-O-T, not the same as Synapse dedicated SQL pools. Synapse dedicated SQL pools are expensive. And the reason why is every single minute that they're running, you get charged. And I left one on over the weekend, and that was an expensive mistake. There is no difference in cost between a Lakehouse and a Warehouse. So if throw that one out. You don't want to use a Lakehouse just because it's cheaper. That's not even a consideration. Because that's one of the reasons that Microsoft went with Fabric, to put everything in the same accounting bucket. So that's not a thing. Another little story. So after the guys from Berkeley took their solution that they lost their Netflix contest on and put that into open source Spark and Parquet, they graduated. And then they thought, to quote one of my favorite movies, Idiocracy, I like money. And like most developers, they realized the second time around, you could make it so much better. And so they went and formed a company. And they called it Databricks. Exactly, y'all know. So they went and found Databricks. And though Databricks has got they have an interesting thing going on. They're like, open source, proprietary stuff. Open source, proprietary stuff. And then they have a convention where they do both of it. Once in the US and once in Europe. So when Delta first came out, they did one of these. Open source, proprietary, open source, proprietary, open source, proprietary. And Snowflakes, bless their little hearts, said, hey, you people are violating the new open source agreement. And they went and said, oh yeah, oops. Because they had that cool Databricks version, and then they had the open source version. And they're like, we got caught. Everybody gets the open source version, so everybody has the open source version now. There is no special, much better Databricks one. And Microsoft looked at that and said, that's what you're doing. Cool beans. And then they went and did some research. Question? Okay. So they did some research, and they developed this white paper. And you can go look it up. It's called Polaris. And they basically took the concepts and then applied them and researched them more. And they did that to create Warehouse, which means that they is a lot faster than what they had in Synapse, because they are better managing the Parquet into memory analysis and making it multiprocessing. So unlike Synapse, you don't have to like create a hash table or tell it you want to do round robin. Nah, you just create a table like you always do. You don't have to deal with that nonsense. So, and it's because they did this research and they figured out how they could do this with Delta Parquet. So the structure is quite different. And they, of course, they wanted to make it work just like SQL Server that we know and love. Except for one thing. And this is something that annoys the daylights out of me for both Warehouse and Lakehouse. It is currently case sensitive. Hate that. But on October 15th, they released an API setting. So for a warehouse, you can make it not case sensitive if you run the API thing script that they have. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, what about Lakehouse? And I was told, it's probably coming, which means it's coming. But you can make Warehouse now if you want to case insensitive, which is great. So it reads, so now here's the big difference between Warehouse and Lakehouse. With a warehouse, there's not a, this is a folder, so this is a file. It's a Delta Parquet for the warehouse. Which means, so that means in Lakehouse, if I want to create a new table, I have to create a new file structure and folder so I can make a table. Don't have to do that in Warehouse. Question?
I just touched a survey of the fabric. So at my company, they have a star schema.
Yep.
On the dedicated SQL pool.
Yep.
So based on my limited knowledge, would the fabric, it does not support the survey key. So how do you handle the relation? How do you handle those private key, foreign key between back and benchmark?
So there is a limit right now on all the SQL that's going back and forth. Basically, there is a list of things that they're working on to add full parity. They're not at full parity, but there is going to be a large list of things that are going to be added at Ignite, and I would recommend that you look at that list when it comes to things like that. So to get full, because there are things that it doesn't do. For example, varchar max, not there. So that's one thing that is not there. But it's not like it's not like they threw it out because they didn't think anybody wanted it. They released it before every single solitary thing was done, and they're doing interim adds. So they're interim adding it. Does that work around in notebooks? Lakehouse and Warehouse use the same underlying SQL, so it's no different in one than the other. The only difference is right now is that you can do case insensitivity in Warehouse using the API, and you can't do that in Lakehouse. So, but because Warehouse does not have the dependency on the file structure, that means in a warehouse, I can say, create table, and it'll work. I can't do that in a Lakehouse. If I want to add a table to a Lakehouse, I've got to add a file structure, because that's how it works. So that's a fundamental difference between the two of them. So let's say that you want to update a Lakehouse. You update the file, and then it works in the Lakehouse because you can't modify the records in a Lakehouse. If I'm in a warehouse and I want to, change a record, I write an update statement. So they're not the same in how they fundamentally work. So when you're thinking about, well, what do I need? What's best for my environment? Do I need to update the underlying data? And if I do, then I have to have a warehouse. The other thing, too, is that I was talking to a client, and this still makes no sense to me, but they said they had to let their users create tables in their warehouse. And I said, why? And they said, because they're power users and they need to do that. I'm like, whatever. Then you have to, but if that is a requirement, then you have to have a warehouse, because you cannot create a table with a SQL statement. You create a table inside of a Lakehouse because you created that Parquet file structure. So you've got your Parquet files and then your Delta log. So they're different in how they work. Now that means that also your ETL steps are different. So if I want to load data into a Lakehouse, I can upload it. I mean, really, I can actually just take a file from my computer and upload it to a Lakehouse. I don't recommend doing that, but it works. It's a great thing for testing. I can use Dataflow Gen 2. I can use a data factory pipeline, or whatever they're calling the pipeline inside of Synapse this week, or excuse me, inside of Fabric this week. It is a pipeline, sometimes called data factory pipeline, the pipeline thingy, that. You can use it to update. And I can also use a notebook to load data into a Lakehouse. But if I am loading data into a warehouse, different list. Notice there's no notebooks on there. So if I want to load data into a warehouse, I am not using a Spark notebook because I can't. It's not possible to do that. Now, if I want to load data from a Lakehouse, I can do that, and I'll show you that in a demo here in a minute. But if I want to create a table, I need to copy it from somewhere. So here I've got a copying from a part of my OneLake. So that would be how I could copy it in. And it will copy into it, and once anything inside of it becomes Delta Parquet, because that's how that works. All right, let me show you a little demo for how to load data into each one so that you can see what the differences are there. So that's not going to work. Now, to use any kind of fabric capacity, you must have a workspace that has a premium capacity on it so you can use fabric content. So it doesn't have to be an F64 or anything, but you do have to have a premium workspace for it to work. And I created a Lakehouse, and I created a warehouse by clicking on this new item and then just picking it. Nothing real exciting there, so we won't get into that, but you can say new item and then pick Lakehouse and warehouse. By the way, it doesn't matter what little icon is down here. Right now, I have one down here called data engineering. You can have Power BI down here. As a matter of fact, I am lazy and a bad typist. So every time I go into Fabric, I type powerbi.com because I can type that really quickly. I don't have to type app.fabric. No, I just type powerbi.com. Doesn't matter. And it works. So you can type app, and so no, that's why it says app.powerbi.com. Doesn't matter. It just resolves to it. So either way, it doesn't matter. Now, also, there's something that's true in Power BI that is true in Fabric. Generally speaking, there's more than one way to do something. Whatever way you find to do it first, that's the best one. You know, just because I do it one way and you do it another way, who cares? They made multiple ways to do different tasks to make it easier to find, because I'm going to find one faster than you might find one faster. So I'm fully aware that perhaps there's a way that you do it that's a little different. It ends up in the same place. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to go to my Lakehouse, and I wanted to specifically do this because I wanted to show you a couple things. For one, I am shortcutting my data from another source. So in this case, my shortcut is coming from ADLS Gen 2. It could come from another Lakehouse or AWS or Snowflake. I can shortcut a number of different things. I'm not going to get into shortcutting, but if you want to look it up, there's a whole bunch of really cool things about it. Now, another thing that I found out, and I don't like this at all, and I think everybody should know like the important things that'll screw you up. So let's say I was working in a client site, and they gave me a shortcut to data. And unlike this is my computer, this is my stuff, I have access to everything. So I didn't realize this. So I got a shortcut to data that I didn't have access to, as in I should not be able to do anything but read it, because I didn't have access to the source. That's why they gave me a shortcut. I could go in and delete this file. And if I do, even though I do not have rights on the source where that is, it'll go away. Yeah. So I don't know what, so the solution for that they were doing is they created a role for that data that wouldn't allow that to happen. But if you shortcut a source and people do not have the ability to access data from the source, you also need to add a role to let people, to give people the, to restrict the ability for people to modify the stuff in that directory. And if you don't, even if they don't have access to it, they can delete it, which is what happened. Question?
So are you sure the person deleting that didn't have elevated workspace rights on the workspace that contained the source data that you shortcut?
So the source data came from I don't know where. And I did it because I was testing it. And I didn't have access to anything but the one workspace they gave me access to. I didn't have access to any other workspaces.
Are you saying the source data was gone?
Yes, I'm saying the source data was gone because I went in here and I deleted this. And I did not have access to where that to the source. So what they did is they put a rule on top of that, a rollback security rule that said that only people who had a certain role could do something other than read the data. Yeah. I was floored. I didn't know that it worked that way.
Did you inform Microsoft about that? Because
Yes, I did.
600 content specifically says that shouldn't happen.
Well, I can do it. and I've done it. And I have talked to Microsoft about it. I did this at a client site, and so what they did is they created that role so you can't. But yeah, I welcome all of you to test it out. Don't do it on anything important, because it works just like that. Yeah. So I didn't think I could do it, and I got the data back. But I mean.
Sorry, where did they set the permissions? Was it at the source, or was it somewhere in the?
So I did not have access at all. The RBAC permission, they did it at the source. At the source. Yes. So they created an RBAC role for it. So if there is no RBAC role, then you can delete it. If there is an RBAC role that says you have to have specific permissions to modify, then you do, and that solved the problem. Yep, but that's how it works. And you can also alter it too. So of course we played with that as well. But now, I do want to, so I am an MVP, but I think it's important for you to learn everything that there is to know so that you're in a good position. So create RBAC roles if you're doing shortcuts and you don't want people to tweak the data. So notice these are all CSV files. Did that on purpose. So these are CSV files, but I want to put them inside of my Lakehouse, and as I told you ad nauseum, those are Delta Parquet. So I'm going to add another one in here, and this is super hard, I'm lying. I'm just going to say load to tables, new table, give it a name. By the way, this is light ETL. If there is anything wrong with this file, it won't load. It'll just give you an error. Now, if one of the things that I have been playing around with in my work inside of Fabric is somebody gave me a survey that they got from a third party, and the only way that we could get it is we downloaded a CSV from that source system, and the CSV file contained the questions without any spaces. But they did include things like punctuation, commas, which meant that I couldn't use those as column names. So that is why this is here. If you say use header, if you remove that because the column names are messed up, it just says C1 underscore C0 underscore C1, et cetera, et cetera. If you have like a footer on the end of it or anything that's not very well-formed files, it will not load. The other thing is that if you load a Parquet file, it knows what the data type is. If you load a CSV file, everything is text because it doesn't know any better. So keep that in mind when you're loading data. So I'm going to go ahead and load this, and this takes a while. So you can see how long it takes up here. But while it's loading, I wanted to show you really what I was talking about before when it comes to the files. So if we go to View Files, we see here that you can see that I did this earlier today, that I've got my Parquet file, and I've got my Delta log. And my Delta log just basically says that there's like one commit in here. So I will always, this is a standard looking Parquet file. Now, if I had modified my data and created a new version of it, then I would have multiple Parquet files potentially in here, or I could partition it. But so really what this is there's a folder called customer, and these are the files that are contained within that. And I will have a set of these for every single table that I have. So this is what they all look like. And this is what I have to have a table inside of a Lakehouse. And this is why I can't use a create statement, because it won't create all this. So that's and eventually, yes, it did load my employees in here. Now this is CSV, but when it loads up in here, it is of course Delta Parquet. Now, it does, kind of guess at some things. Like it did guess successfully that these are dates, but don't count on it. Sometimes it's right, and sometimes it doesn't guess very well. So, but it did do a pretty decent job this time of guessing it. But I have seen it where, for whatever reason, my flags show up as text instead of numeric, or my dates don't show up as dates because reasons. So that's what happens when you load things. Now, let's talk about how I can load to a warehouse, because again, that's a different question.
Yeah, you mentioned very briefly there the partitioning. That's been rolling around in my head as far as the data warehouse goes. My understanding from what you said is there's no control over the Parquet files if you're using a data warehouse?
Nah, well, I didn't mean to lead you with that impression. What it is it's not a one-to-one relationship. You can partition.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's not like here's a file. It is the data warehouse Parquet file. So it's not as clean as this. But yes, you can partition it, and it does work that way.
I had about the files in the
Lakehouse.
Lakehouse. I've been struggling trying to figure out what file types you can actually import. It seems like Excel's not included. You can't use any files that have been compressed.
No, so this is basically CSV and Parquet. This is not an ETL tool. You can modify well-formed CSV, and you can upload Parquet. If you need to transform if you have an Excel file, which I've had, then you have to do like a copy data. Stick it in a pipeline. Yeah. If there's anything not perfect about it, it goes in a pipeline. You make it pretty. You take it from whatever weird format to get it into here. So just well-formed stuff. Other question over here?
Once you've built your table from your CSV, is it tied to it?
Once I've built my table to a CSV, is it tied to it? I've actually created a copy here.
So you can delete the CSV and not worry about it, or you still have to have it?
Well, I mean, yeah, I could, because it doesn't impact the data in this at all, to answer your question. And this is, even though it's a shortcut, which doesn't copy data, I just copy the data. Because I did. Question?
Is there any differences in performance in having things in a Lakehouse where they're split out into different files versus having the warehouse where it's
No.
file?
No. Because they use different technology, underlying technology for the same things too. Now, you can do different things with them too. So another thing that's different between a Lakehouse and a warehouse is the amount of default time travel that you have with Delta. So with Delta, you can go look at previous days' versions. So if I wanted to look at the data as of the 4th, I could. But in a Lakehouse, you have 7 days by default. In a warehouse, you have 30 by default. So you can go back further in time. Now, you can make it go more days. However, more days, more files. More files, more I/O. More I/O, performance goes down. So there is a cost for that in performance. So keep that in mind when you're doing it. Question?
So with the recent inclusion of TSQL in notebooks, do you foresee engineers feeling the need to have warehouses? My understanding of the warehouse is that Microsoft is trying to sort of keep a scenario where the SQL engineer can still do T-SQL as opposed to have to transition into Spark on a notebook.
So here's the thing. And I think it's important to answer questions when you have it rather than I get to it on a slide. But I found out recently that there is a reason that you might want to use a warehouse all the time. Because Microsoft has designed the underlying query performance to be better.
Is that what Connor was talking about earlier?
Yeah, so if the most important thing to you is that your queries come back the fastest on your database of choice, then especially if you have large data, you will have better performance on a warehouse. Now here's a question. What are you doing with your warehouse? To be honest, most of the clients that I have, they want Power BI. And they have less and less users who know anything about SQL and are running queries. So if the users aren't running a bunch of queries, it doesn't matter. So if the only reason that you have a lakehouse or a warehouse is so that you can run Power BI reports, you don't need anybody to update tables, because what the hell are they doing that for a Power BI report? So there's no reason not to use a lakehouse.
So you're confirming that direct lake performance?
So direct lake, yes. Well, so direct lake performance works a little differently, so you're not going to see the big difference between a lakehouse and a warehouse. So it just depends. Again, it depends on what you want. And depending on what you want, either one of them is the most thing. To be honest, anymore, I don't have a lot of people who are doing lots of queries on my warehouse anymore. They're generally speaking, I want a Power BI report for that. Or they want a report builder report so they can download all the data and put it in Excel, which makes me cry. But let's face it, that's really what they want those report builder reports for. They're not looking at 300 pages of data. They're just loading it into Excel. I remember I had a client one time, and I looked at the report, and I'm like, do you have a printer that can print 27 inches wide? And they said, oh, no, we just have that report so we can dump it all to Excel. Yeah, I know. Makes me sad. But this is if it's well-formed, I showed you how I could load it into a lakehouse. Now, into a warehouse, I can do something differently. Now, of course, you can have your Dataflow Gen 2 have a destination of a lakehouse. You could have that be your destination be a warehouse. But I want to show you a trick so that it doesn't matter, which is I can do it from my lakehouse. Now, why on earth would I want to do this? So give you a scenario where I want to take the data from my lakehouse and put it into my warehouse. If I want to run stored procedures to load it all. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, a lot of times you will build a lakehouse if you're doing medallion architecture as your bronze layer. You're bringing it in from some places that might be messed up, and you've got all this data in your lakehouse, and nobody's really querying that. You're just kind of figuring out how you're going to need to make that pretty and put it into a warehouse. So if you've done that in your lakehouse, you can use that as a source to make your warehouse pretty. And all I have to do is something like this, where I am doing a 3-part reference to my lakehouse, and I can create a table that way. So that's how easy it is to load from a lakehouse to a warehouse, if that's how you want to do it.
As long as they're in the same workspace?
Yes. Or you could do it if you have access, if you have shared permissions. You can do that too. Because you can share out a lakehouse and you don't have to have access to it in the workspace to do it. So anything you have access to. And I could, do cross lakehouse queries if I wanted to. Any kinds, I'm doing something simple because, demo. But you could do something way more complicated than this.
Does the name of the lakehouse have to be unique across the whole tenant?
Does the name of the lakehouse have to be unique across the whole tenant? I don't believe it checks for that. Yeah, I don't know. You would think it would need to be though, right? Because then it would be an issue if you had. I don't know. Generally speaking, I don't know that people. I just said that and I thought of scenario. I don't believe there's a check for that. There definitely is inside of a single in a single workspace, but across the whole tenant, I don't know.
Yeah, because it sort of adds on to the question about can you do cross.
Well, yeah, and it would be an issue to do cross to cross if you've got the same name in 2 workspaces and you've got one shared. Yeah, it would be. So I don't know the answer to that question. So it's a good one, but I do not know. We'll have to hit up somebody from Microsoft and ask them if they check. But this is how I would create a table. So if there's no way, let's see if I can, so if you look here, you'll look that there's no ability to look at files because I don't have that one-to-one relationship between a file and a table. So I can just make whatever tables I want to, as many as I want to, which I cannot do in a Lakehouse. Cannot do create. I could also choose to update records in a warehouse. I could not do that in a Lakehouse, not using SQL. To do it in a Lakehouse, I'm going to have to write a new Parquet file that has the modification that I want. Can't use SQL. So there's some differences between the 2 of them, depending upon what you want to do. Now for both of them, if I wanted to do this all in Management Studio, if I click on the gear, I would see that I have my SQL connection string here. And if I copy this, and then I go into SQL Server, and I paste the ridiculously long name inside of here. And this is if you ever wonder, wow, I wonder how old my version of Management Studio is, because it's been a while. Microsoft decided that everybody knew the name of Azure Active Directory. So it was time for a name change. And so in February, they changed the name to Entra. And if you have a new version, it's the same thing. New names, new name, same product. So it's called Entra now. And if you have a new version of Management Studio, it'll say Entra Directory, Universal with MFA. But yes, you do have to have Universal with MFA to be able to connect to it. And then once I connect to it, I can connect to it in here. Now this will connect me not only to my one Lakehouse or my one warehouse. Why is this doing that? Oh, wrong ID. But to everything. Because you get access to everything you have access to in the workspace. So I don't need another one of these for every single one, which you probably have played with before. And then I happen to like the interface better. One thing that drives me nuts about the using it inside of Fabric is it always wants to save my queries. I don't want to save my queries. My query's garbage. I just want it to go away. But it says, no, you need to save your queries. Then I got to go delete the queries, and yeah, that's a problem. So in this particular workspace, I only have 2 database items. I have a Lakehouse and I have a warehouse. So I have one endpoint, and I can see them both. And if I wanted to then do whatever I wanted to do, I could do it in here. So I could write a similar query to load a table. So the same thing. Because my data is not going to be, and that's how I'm going to have to create anything, is doing it using a SQL statement. Any questions about this? Yeah?
Something that was very scary to me was when I loaded my OneLake Explorer.
Yeah.
And I could see these files in my Windows Explorer.
Yep.
And yeah, that was a little bit scary. But what I want to know is, for the tables that you create in the data warehouse,
Yes.
can you also explore them in the OneLake Explorer and the Windows Explorer?
No.
No, so only the Lakehouse tables.
Right, because they're not, it's not a one-to-one. I don't have a customer file. I have the warehouse file. It's all in there. And that's why they're different. And that's why I can do a create statement inside of a warehouse, because I don't have the one table per one file. And I know it's a folder with a log and then the Parquet files beneath it. But warehouse is not like that, so I can create my own tables if I want to on the fly. And it handles all of that internally using the logic that they created for that. So you will see the warehouse Parquet file. The warehouse Parquet file. If you have one table or you have a million, well, a million's not supported, but there you go. Any other questions? Yeah.
What would happen if you tried to run a create table on your Lakehouse with here?
Oh, you get an error. I can't remember the syntax of the error, but you know it's a Microsoft error, so the syntax will be complete and full, and you'll completely understand everything it says. Sarcasm. So yeah, you get an error. And same if you try to insert a record, because you cannot do that in a Lakehouse. You can do that in a warehouse. Or you try to do an alter. So they are not done, though, like I said, with everything when it comes to all of the SQL. So there's some things that aren't supported in terms of what you can do. So let's take a look at some of that stuff. So, yeah. Do I know the shortcut for Salesforce? If there is, I know there is not. Well, that's because I can easily remember all of the things you can shortcut to, because I only have this many fingers. Because I'm not from Norfolk, because then I wouldn't need this many. But you can only shortcut Google, AWS, Snowflake, and ADLS and ADLS Gen 2. If you want to do, yeah, I've done Salesforce. You bring it in first. Yeah, you do a copy command and bring it in. Yeah, yeah. Now, like I said, there are some limitations for things you cannot do yet inside of the T-SQL version that's in a Lakehouse or a warehouse. And the reason that I have this QR code here is because I looked. This was updated yesterday. And I bet between now and Ignite that is going to be updated a lot. Because the goal is that there will be nothing that you cannot see. But right now, there's no varchar max. There are limited constraints, as in, to your point, you can't enforce foreign keys. So basically, they're just a suggestion. So limited types of constraints. You cannot do temporary tables. So funny. I run the Arizona Data Platform Users Group, and we were talking about stored procs. And this girl's like, you can write a stored proc without a temp table? I've never seen one at my work. I'm like, oh my goodness, where do you work? The state. Yeah, but yes, no temporary tables of any kind. Yeah.
How about a function, a table function?
Isn't it like CTE?
TDI, no.
What? No user-defined functions.
Oh, are there any?
Yeah. So that answers that, yeah. No triggers, not a bad thing. Yeah, no cursors, not a bad thing. Yeah. So, and no recursion. Question? What are people using this for? What T-SQL inside of a warehouse or a lakehouse?
What are people using it for? Because so far it seems kind of useless.
They use it because they want it to be their source for Power BI. So again, Fabric is is basically expanded Power BI. There are not a lot of people from the business community who have the skills or the ability to do their analysis by going into a SQL warehouse and typing a lot of T-SQL to get their answers. There are some, but that's not a real big number, which is why more of them do their analysis inside of a tool like Power BI or Excel. You know, as much as we hate to say it, they're not your primarily. I mean, your business users are not doing that. So that's why. Do I have a lot of people that are using Fabric Data Warehouse? To be honest, in the
Fabric and the other one.
oh, Fabric and Synapse? Yes, because they haven't gotten off of it yet. Yeah. So, and it takes time. And the thing is, too, is that like I don't think anybody should do a conversion because somebody came up with a new product. That's a lame reason to do a conversion. You do a conversion because you have a business benefit to do the conversion. For example, if you've got all of your data that you've got in an ADF pipeline and it writes it to an ADLS Gen 2 account, great, use it. You can use that inside of a Lakehouse, but you can shortcut it. Don't do a conversion because Microsoft has new Shiny. But there are some business reasons that you would want to convert from Synapse to Fabric, and that is cost. Definitely. Question?
So, you can't do a lot of fun stuff in the warehouse.
Correct.
You can't use the notebooks with the warehouse.
Correct.
And you can't do the data flow Gen 2 with reasonable amounts of data.
Reasonable amount. Well, yeah, lots of data will make it blow up, yeah.
Where do you do your ETL?
You can do your ETL in either a pipeline or you can do it into a notebook and then load it into your warehouse. So you can write ADF, or you can write SQL statements inside of your pipeline, and those can then write those to your warehouse. So you don't have to do it that way. They you can write the output to them to the data warehouse.
Oh, okay.
So, question?
Yeah, just a comment on Synapse Analytics. We're actually going to keep Azure Synapse Analytics because it's going to work out cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you find that it is cheaper and you've got things working in it, don't do it. But there are definitely reasons to do it, and I want to get to how you can if you find that that's the best solution for you. So if you Lakehouse limitations, you cannot transform data. And your data transformation needs to be part of your ETL process. So if you end up with a Parquet file that you have transformed inside of Fabric and end up in your Lakehouse, then that can be your endpoint right there. For warehouse, you can't use a notebook to load data. Loading data is a SQL process. So here's the thing too. Who's going to do what with it, depending on what your data is? Data engineers, they don't really care. Data scientists, they just want the raw data. They're not going to write stuff they're not going to modify tables. Data analysts, they're primarily loading data inside of Power BI. They don't need to write tables or modify the data. Data citizens, they don't know enough to generally do that. So so who needs to update the data warehouse? Well, these people don't. So none of these. You don't necessarily need to update data in a data warehouse, because if it's perfect, you don't have to have those problems with it. So I'm running out of time here, so I just wanted to mention something. For medallion architecture, Lakehouses are recommended for your medallion architecture. There's no reason you can't load the data to whatever you want to, and your user requirements are going to dictate whether or not you need a warehouse. Because if your users are going to have to create tables, then your gold layer is going to need to be a warehouse. But you may do your transformation. You may do your transformation in Parquet, and then, like I said, put it into a Lakehouse, and then migrate it to a warehouse for them. And a couple of the differences between Lakehouse and warehouse: that default time retention. You have a default time retention in your warehouse of 30 days versus 7. And you cannot modify your data in the Lakehouse only when the files are created. You can do multi-table CUD, that is create, update, and delete in warehouse. You cannot do that in a Lakehouse. You do that in Spark and write it to tables, because everything is you're writing is files. But if you are doing massively wild analysis inside of your warehouse, because that's what you do in your work, then warehouse will have faster query performance. So here's the other question too. I did say that, new Shiny, there's no reason to update. But should you migrate a Synapse dedicated SQL pool to data warehouse and Fabric? Well, if customers would benefit from moving it, and you can, but here's the thing, yes, I think you should. Because dedicated SQL pools cost a lot of money every minute that they're on. And you will most likely have a big cost savings when you move your warehouse from Synapse to Fabric. And the performance is excellent. So you're not getting sub-performance by the migration at all. And you're paying a lot less for it. So that is a big reason to go ahead and do that. Now, how do you do that? Microsoft has written some code that will make that possible for you to do that. And they have put all of the code into a GitHub repo so that all you have to do is basically copy it and just change the location for things. So I didn't, it takes a long time to do this, which is why I couldn't do this and talk about anything else other than this during this presentation, but I wanted to provide the information for you so that you have the ability to do that. I have been told that they realize that having people do their conversion through GitHub with PowerShell is kind of a drag. They know this, but this works right now. You don't have to wait till some future date when they have something better. This works now. And this is not new. They did this for FabCon Vegas in March. So this isn't something that they just ran out and did last week. So this has been running for a while. So what do you have to do if you want to do this? Well, you're going to need to deploy the SQL scripts that are inside of there to your dedicated SQL pool inside of Synapse. You're going to need to add a managed identity workspace user to the source DB and give it alter schema, create and select permissions. And then there is a specific script, we'll take a look at the scripts in a second, that's called check Synapse unsupported SQL. Because again, not all the SQL is supported from one to the other, and then run the PowerShell script. So let's take a look at that code so that you can see how to do that. So take a look at that and kind of walk through the way that those two different ones work. So this is the GitHub repo for it. I know this is extremely difficult to see, but this is the check unsupported. So it's basically looking, identifying all the things that it will not do. So you're definitely going to want to run this particular item here. You'll notice that all of the data warehouse scripts live here. You've got your prerequisites, which detail the user ID that you're going to have to create and what you have to do. And then you're going to need to run a PowerShell script, make sure that you have the prerequisites for it to be able to run it. And then you can take a look at the different scripts for your migration to migrate all of your structures over to Fabric. And then it shows you the CETOS extract SQL so you can get all of the data over there. So you're definitely going to want to go through this and then run it to migrate your stuff over from Synapse, because you will have a giant cost savings when you do this. Now, if there are things you're like, I can't live with, some of these items, at least you know that in advance, and you'll have to wait for when more of this information is supported. This is regularly updated. I talked to the guy who did this, and he updated a part of this a couple weeks back when they changed some of the unsupported items. So it's something that they're not abandoning in any way, shape, or form. So it's definitely something that you should take a look at if that is your world. Any questions about that? All right. So getting back to whether or not you should do a Lakehouse or a warehouse. Well, basically, it depends. How do you plan on updating the data? Do you really want, do you want to be just doing everything inside of Spark and then have files and be done with it? What is it going to be really difficult for people to support? If it's going to be, if you guys like, yeah, we don't have anybody that really does Python, we don't want to go there, then you would do something where you would do things in pipelines so that you don't have to write Spark. Again, it's an option. And based on your environment, you decide what's best based on the skills of your people and then what people are doing with the output. So if you need to look at 30 days of data changes, you might want to then stick with the warehouse so that you can go back in time and look at those different days for those different items. So with that, thank you very much, and I really appreciate all the great questions and all the great interaction. Thank you so much. Question?
How sticky is the data once it's in there?
How sticky is the data once it's in where?
Once it's in Fabric?
Once it's in Fabric?
Can you stick the Parquet files to another vendor product?
Yes, it's 100% open source Parquet. So if you get mad at them and you want to take your files and go somewhere else, go for it. And that's the beauty of it. So, you're welcome. Question? Even the data warehouse files? No, not exactly.